All right, welcome back to another episode of the Unspoken Words podcast, a Selective Mutism podcast by the Smart Center, produced and published by New Edition Productions. This is going to be our very last episode of 2025, and we decided to do something a little bit different for this episode as we head towards the official end of the year. We're going to take a look back at some of the most popular chapters from this year of the Unspoken Words podcast. We had a lot of amazing episodes this year. We had a handful of Shining Star episodes. We did a lot of Dr. E's. We had some amazing guests on. We recorded some podcasts at Communicamp this summer. It was an amazing podcast year for us, and Dr. E enjoyed every second of it. Maybe this is the first episode you're listening to. Maybe you've been with us for all 68 episodes, but we can't thank our listeners enough for continuing to support the podcast and continuing to motivate us to keep recording new episodes every 2 weeks. These 5 clips coming up are the most listened to clips from our YouTube and most listened to clips overall. And we want to take some of those best performing chapters and bring them back to the surface to listen to one more time before we head into 2026. Before we get started, just like every other episode, I'm going to say the same exact thing. If you have any questions on anything here in these clips, please head to selectivemutismcenter.org/ask Dr. E. Enter your question in the form. The team does read all your submissions, and we do our best to answer them on podcast episodes. We answer them on blog posts and on social media. And speaking of social media, for the best of every episode of Unspoken Words, make sure you're following us on Instagram and YouTube. We are at Unspoken Words _podcast on Instagram and Unspoken Words Podcast by Dr. E over on YouTube.
Hi everyone, it's Dr. E. Before we get started with today's episode, I'm so excited to announce that our popular Selective Mutism in the School virtual conference is now available as a self-paced online course. The conference dives into how to assess the mute child, testing for common comorbidities, and proven strategies and interventions to support students with SM within the school. And of course, we dive into accommodations and interventions such as 504s and IEPs. The course offers 5.5 continuing education credits for most professionals, so parents, share this opportunity with your child's school. To sign up, just head to our website or check the description in this podcast episode. Together, we can create a world where every child has a voice. Now, enjoy the episode.
So here are the best 5 chapter cuts of 2025, starting with a clip from episode 45, which was released back on January 27th of this year. And in the episode, Dr. E sits down with former Smart Center patient Nick Jones and discusses how he overcame selective mutism. In the clip we pulled from this episode, Nick reflects on overcoming SM and the vital support from therapists, family, and friends. So check it out.
So Nick, as far as advice to teens struggling with SM, they haven't had a successful experience yet in being able to find their voice. They're pretty stuck. What is your advice to them?
Yeah, so I think the biggest piece of advice that I could give is that you're not alone. And coming from me, I've been exactly where you're at, feeling very lost, very almost hopeless in the sense that I wasn't sure if I would ever overcome selective mutism, but that it is possible. I think a big piece of advice that helped me in my journey was to take it one step at a time. And if there is a goal that you're trying to reach and it seems even too far out there, break that down into smaller goals to ultimately reach that bigger goal. I think that was a huge piece that helped me in my journey. My therapist called it the ladder. So I had different sets of goals along this ladder that I would try to get to, whether it was going to a store and asking an employee a question, or going to 3 stores, or sending a video of me talking to a friend. Like if something seemed too far up that ladder, we'd break things down into smaller little goals. And I would kind of work my way up that ladder, just stepping along those rungs of the ladder to reach those bigger goals. So definitely just take it one little step at a time.
So it's interesting you say that. I see it as a bridge a lot because it's the steps on the bridge, which is very similar to the ladder. But that advice is great for parents because one of the things, Nick, that I see happen a lot with families just starting at the Smart Center or calling us is that they want to go from like 0 to 100. I want my child to talk in school. I want my child to say hi and bye to their aunts and uncles. I want my child to say thank you. I want my child to talk to their friends. That is just such a big goal so quickly. And what ends up happening if you're trying, and I'd love you to touch on this, when your goals are too big, they're just not ready for it. It ends up creating more anxiety and avoidance. And I think that's where the hopelessness comes in too, is that I'm never going to get there. I can't do it. And so you feel lost, like you're swimming in a huge ocean. And I think that's what you're trying to say. And I want teens to understand you can overcome it. I want adults, parents, teachers, therapists to realize that it isn't just quote unquote crossing the bridge in one foul swoop. You've got to trust the process, trust your clinician that is an expert in this, hopefully, that can really help guide you to what those steps are. And that's what happened with you. You were able to realize, where am I on the ladder, on the bridge, and work towards it in a way that you felt comfortable and safe. So you're always going to be a bit uncomfortable, right? Like trying, like 0 to 5, let's say, where 5 is the hardest, 0 is the easiest. You can't live life in 0 out of 0 or 0 out of 5. You just can't. You've got everything you want, they say, is what? On the other side of fear. But you've got to respect, you shouldn't feel a 5, maybe a 2 or a 3, right? So you have to push yourself within the realm of your ability to do it. And that's what you did.
Yeah. So there were several times where I would be engaged in exposure therapy and something seemed too big for me. And I would almost feel like I had failed in a way, and that like I wasn't going to ultimately reach that goal that I was hoping for. And there were times where I just wanted to quit and not go forward and press forward. And there were several periods of time where I would stay stagnant of where I was at in my journey and becoming verbal. And I would sort of feel like I was taking a step back, even though I wasn't really. But I think that it's important to realize that in those situations where you feel like you're kind of lost and not really sure like how you can make more progress, and oh, I want to talk to this person or that person or this group of people, making those smaller steps and those smaller increments is so instrumental. At least it was in my journey. I think that it's so important to realize that in the moment, anxiety is sort of seen as like an arc. And that's something that my therapist also would tell me time and time again, is that like in the moment, or even like after the fact, whatever that looks like, the anxiety is going to gradually rise up, and it's going to probably peak right around the time that you want to start verbalizing with someone. But ultimately, just trust that that anxiety is not going to go past a certain point, and that at the end of the day, you're still going to be you. That anxiety is not going to rule you over, because it ultimately will fall again. And it's sort of like this process of rising and falling. But for me, a big piece of my journey was just realizing that this anxiety, it's not going to last forever. And it was sort of like a journey where I became more and more comfortable with that anxiety being there, and not necessarily trying to like piece that anxiety out of the picture, but sort of like me accepting the fact that the anxiety is going to be with me. And that's not necessarily going to be something I can just throw away, but it was okay to live with that and still press forward with that.
I love how you phrase that too. The way I'm hearing it is that you didn't let anxiety rule you and take over. You became more on top of it and understood it is going to be there to an extent. That's one of the reasons I asked you that original question about, now that you've quote unquote overcome SM. It's not like you're never going to feel anxiety in your life. It's never that you're never going to have, you're not going to have moments in your life where you may feel sad. Of course you will. Life is such that you're going to have the ups and the downs. It's how you journey and the coping skills you have to deal with it in the perspective. And I love the 0 to 5 because it gives individuals a way to break that down. And all of those philosophies can take you in life. Are there any examples you have? And you may not, because I'm asking a question that it's kind of interesting. Like, are there examples of using that philosophy of breaking it down and kind of starting with where you're at and respecting your comfort and feelings for things that you do in school now?
Yeah, in a sense, I feel like throughout the engineering process of taking an ultimate goal that you want to achieve and sort of starting at square one of like, okay, let me brainstorm some crazy ideas about how I can reach this goal. I think that that's can kind of work its way back into that concept of breaking things down into smaller increments. Because with the engineering process, you have like brainstorming and ideation and sort of like fabricating your design and like creating whatever you're trying to create. You can break it down into all these little steps to ultimately get to that bigger picture of like the final product. So this past spring, I was involved in a class where it was a group project where my group was tasked with building a bridge that spanned about 5 or 6 feet, and it would collapse into itself. So we pretty much had an entire semester to like create this final product. So I think that definitely allowed me to like break things down into like smaller goals where we kind of took it one step at a time of like, okay, this week we're going to do this, and next week we're going to refine this process and like test it. So at the end of all of that semester, it was just so rewarding to look back and be like, wow, we did this together as a team, and like all these little steps, they really added up to this final product.
Yeah, it's a great example. So you broke it up, and that's what you did with your treatment, and here you are.
All right. Nick is one of our most well-known former Smart Center patients. He's has a YouTube channel of his own. You should go check out. If you guys want to listen to more from Nick, go back to episode 45 on the podcast feed. Our next clip is from episode 47, which was released 2 weeks later on February 24th. This was an Ask Dr. E episode that I recorded with Dr. E. And in this clip, someone asked Dr. E a question about treatment guidance for their 4-year-old with SM, who also is experiencing challenges with the quad, which is toileting, eating, sleeping, and behavior. So here is what Dr. E recommended for that 4-year-old. Let's move on to the fifth and final question of this episode. This one's a bit longer, a lot of different moving parts. So interested to get your perspective. For a 4-year-old who is selectively mute at daycare and also exhibits all 4 of the quad, what do you recommend for a treatment plan, especially given that so many of the challenges are exacerbated or perpetuated by the school environment? For example, the school requires a pull-up diaper to prevent accidents, and this child is unwilling to eat at school, etc. Should initial treatment focus on courage and speech only, or should it focus on aspects of the quad at home and outside the school? In other words, where should treatment start if we were to maximize the highest chance of progress while also balancing the ask of the school and not overwhelming this child? And how would you proceed once progress is beginning to be made?
Yeah, so this again is a lot here in this,
Yeah.
A lot of meat in this question.
They usually are.
Yeah, no, I mean, the families writing in, they don't know what to do, right? And they want recommendations and advice. So there's going to be a lot there in some of these questions, and I'm happy to do this, which is why we do this. I will say an evaluation, I keep saying that because the term selective mutism implies child isn't speaking. Let's do whatever we can to get them to talk. And a clinician working with this population that has a lot of experience knows that that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just not where the focus should be. Speaking will occur when we can set this up right, and that involves understanding the child. So whomever you are working with should definitely do a full evaluation to determine what those child's unique needs are, because until things are in place, you're not going to have a successful outcome in my mind. So what we do is we do the selective mutism evaluation, and that evaluation involves a developmental history, which includes the quads, right? The quad, let me explain what that is. It's toileting challenges, eating challenges, sleeping, and behavioral difficulties. I call it the quad because kids can have all of those 4 things. Maybe they only have 1 or 2. I will say the more that a child struggles with the quad, the more that they have sensory challenges. And sensory processing challenges is definitely a Y of SM. What that means is that's a factor into the development and perhaps the maintenance of it. So that if we don't understand those child's needs, that they may have some sensory processing challenges and they're very sensory sensitive, most likely, then that's going to not allow for a real smooth treatment, frankly. It's going to be very frustrating. In addition, I'd want to understand that child's baseline stages of social communication in school. What are they like one-on-one with their teacher, with peers? How are they communicating in small groups and large groups? How are they doing with tasks? The child's 4. Are they completing tasks on time? Do they need redirection? Are they functioning at basically their age level? Like I need to know that, right? To develop
Yeah.
school-based accommodations and interventions. And so once we know all that, then it's a comprehensive treatment. And that comprehensive treatment involves dealing with educating parents, right? Educating the school, but starting to work through the quad behaviors. Why does this child have the toileting issues? Is it a social anxiety? There's a term called paruresis that starts really young, which is kind of shy bladder syndrome. They won't go to the bathroom outside the home. And that's a social anxiety trait. So maybe this is a shy or timid child with sensory sensitivities. And so we have to address that and get that set up and get accommodations. Maybe this child needs an IEP. So going through an IEP evaluation to be able to get the accommodations and interventions to be able to meet that child where they're at and develop a step-by-step treatment plan. So it isn't just one thing. You're going to be working on everything. We're going to be working on toileting. We're going to be working on the sensitivity of eating. Maybe they're a picky eater from their sensory sensitivities. You can't force them to eat pretzels if they don't like it. So you have to kind of understand that, respect that. And again, toileting issues, behaviors, maybe this child needs more structure, consistency, routine, predictability, working with daily, weekly, and monthly calendars so they know what, when, and where. There's so much at stake with just developing a treatment plan. There's so much to do. But the good news is once there's an understanding of a child, once you understand their needs, their unique presentation, then the individualized treatment plan is developed for at home to deal with the quad, to deal with parenting, to know how to parent this child, how to educate aunts, uncles, relatives, how to deal with play dates. Where do you start with play dates? How do you bring the child into social communication? Who are the children you start with? How do you get play dates at the home versus somebody else's home? Where's the best place to start? In the real world, in the community, practicing in stores and restaurants, out and about, that's going to build, consistency, but it's going to help your child make the progress, which will then carry over into other environments. Educating aunts and uncles and adult friends on how to question, when to question, bringing a bag of props of high interest activities that can be, you can see it's going on, and educating the staff, like having an IEP in place for this child. If this child is struggling in these areas, not just put a pull-up on, but, let's figure out how we can help this child. I mean, they're only 4, so they're not 6 or 7. So, but definitely working on that. I mean, we will have parents go to the bathroom with the child. Then we chart it where the parent takes 2 steps out, charts the child goes to the bathroom. The child's aware, takes 5 steps out. And then eventually the child's going to the bathroom in the school bathroom. If they are a sensory sensitive child, they may not feel comfortable going to the bathroom in a public bathroom in school where all the kids go. So there are times that they have to go into a different location or go when there's few people around. Maybe it's the loud flushing toilets for a sensory sensitive kid. You see what I mean? So you can see that there's so many angles, again, avenues you go down when trying to develop a treatment plan for all aspects of that child's life. It's getting a full understanding of that child's needs in all ways and figuring out what those whys are to accommodate those whys, understand those whys, and begin to make the progress through understanding the child's baseline stage and teaching the teachers the strategies, interventions to where they're starting at to move them across the bridge.
I just want to make a note that we actually covered the quad pretty extensively in episode 7 of the Unspoken Words podcast. So if you haven't listened to that episode or you haven't listened to it in a while, I would go back and listen to that. But to answer this question specifically before we wrap up, it sounds like the focus should be sort of on the quad first, right? Like those are the most stressful pieces for this 4-year-old. And is that the area you attack first? That's kind of what they're asking?
What I'm getting from this is the courage to speak and kind of focusing right at that speaking part and being brave to talk without realizing that if we're not addressing these other issues, but the quad is one aspect. You are not ignoring the parent education to bring that child into social communication opportunities through developing strategies. Like, for example, the parent can still go to a restaurant, have the visuals of what that child wants. The parent might start out in this case of, do you want this or that? No answer, this or that. Tell me. Use a verbal intermediary, maybe with just what do you want and a visual prompt. The child answers, I don't know this child, but you still are training the parents for social communication to bring that child into social communication opportunities. And in addition, you are going to, comfort precedes communication. So you're dealing with the quad and you're dealing with social communication. So what I don't love is the focus on talk, 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 being brave to talk here when this child has other issues. I would say they're being brave just to show up, and maybe they're brave to just hand over, take over. I don't know. But I feel kids, like, I don't focus just being brave to talk. I focus on the whole person and giving them the confidence, the independence, and the structure they need from a compassionate understanding standpoint to make that progress. I mean, we see this at camp all the time. These families come in and just the change in their way of talking to their child from day 1 to 2 makes such a change. I say this so often that if we did a communicamp where it was just parents and no children, you'd still see progress, because the training we do for parents will allow for that progress to be made, because they're changing the way they talk to their child. They're changing how they can bring their child into social communication opportunities. They're understanding their child's needs. And of course, working with the children are important too. Of course, that's a big part of it. But I'm just saying that parent education and training from all perspectives. I mean, for this parent, educating aunts and uncles about my child worksheet, right? On how to question, where to question, when, avoiding direct eye contact. The child brings a bag of props to sit down. There's so many things to do. Who are you focusing on play dates with? Obviously, school peers would be ideal. And those are the kids that the teacher pairs groups and sits with, that child, right? How they sit in a large group near the teacher, near their buddies. If the child makes progress with the friends at home, we transition the speech into school. Do you see what I mean? So you're never isolating out, let's just work on the quad. You're working on the whole person at the same time.
Yeah.
But you're meeting them where they're at. Hey listeners, we'll get back to the episode in a second. I want to tell you about Communicamp, our popular 3+ day intensive group treatment and all-day parent education and support program designed to help parents, children, and teens overcome selective mutism, social anxiety, and extreme shyness. Over 3+ action-packed days, your child or teen will engage in immersive activities guided by expert clinicians that build confidence and communication skills in a supportive, fun, and collaborative environment. Spaces are limited and spots book up fast. To learn more, please find Communicamp in this episode's description or head to communicamp.org and complete our interest form, and our team will be in touch. Let's help your child or teen find their voice at Communicamp. Let's get back to the episode.
All right, so our next clip is from the very next episode, episode 48, which was released on March 10th, and is another Shining Stars episode, just like the first chapter cut, which was from Nick's Shining Star episode. In episode 48, we speak with former Smart Center patient Alex Collins. In this cut from the episode, Alex reflects back on her unique but relatable experience with SM. Here it is.
You've come so far. So way back when, can you remember a bit about what you felt like way back when, 6, 7 years old?
Again, and it's interesting because I'm so far removed from that now. I'm fully an adult, but something like an experience with selective mutism, it really sticks with you. So I have so many distinct memories from back then and from going through that whole journey and overcoming it. So it's cool to reflect on that now.
Yeah, well, we're going to do that today a bit, because sometimes I talk to adults who really don't remember much when they were younger. I don't know if they blocked it out or they just have gone far, different places in their life. And I think because you are so engrossed in the field now, that you probably, those memories have surfaced and stayed there because of your passion. So I can understand that. So tell us, when you were little, what do you remember way back when, even before you came to the Smart Center?
I remember definitely knowing from the time I started going to school that I was different from the rest of my peers. I was able to make one really close friend before I started school. So I was always fully verbal with her. But when I got to school, the anxiety kind of took over, and I realized very quickly that I wasn't like the other kids in the way that I just was not able to get my words out at all in the classroom, in the school setting ever. And really only at home was I able to do that. And I definitely remember thinking that that was just me. That was who I was, and I was never going to be any different, because obviously I didn't have the language to know what selective mutism was, or that could ever even be a diagnosis.
And just for our listeners, one of the things that I'm very big about is understanding why someone developed SM, which is important because it may have been a factor into SM where learned behavior came about, but also what might be maintaining it for those that still struggle with social communication. And in your case, do you remember what your whys were?
Yes, I was very timid and I have always been a high anxiety presenting person. So those were my whys.
Right. So you didn't really have a lot with like speech and language or any sort of learning challenges, anything like that. You didn't have innate like social skill deficits. You were what I call almost like a dictionary. If there is a dictionary picture of SM, what most people see SM as are the highly sensitive, very timid individuals. And for those individuals like yourself, you get the right treatment and you build the social communication skills and confidence, and you can be fully verbal, engaging in society, and you're not really accommodating a why that might be holding you up a little, like it might be holding up some individuals where they need different type of approach to treatment. So I love talking to you because you're so articulate. You're always able to express that. So I remember meeting your mom, and I remember you driving kind of far, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you came to the Smart Center. Do you remember what some of the things were that we did back then that helped you?
The main thing, I don't remember much about being at the center. I remember the intake, and I remember going into the room with my parents and sitting on my mom's lap. And I remember you asked me to pick a crayon out of the box.
You remember this? You're
Yes,
amazing.
this is what I remember. And you asked me to do that, and I was like frozen. I couldn't move. I like was completely turned away from you. That's like my core memory from the Smart Center before present day. But yeah, that's my main memory. And I know that because I'm the oldest of 5 kids, we didn't make it to the actual center a lot. But I know there was a lot of working with my parents behind the scenes and sort of giving them the knowledge and skills they needed and to then bring it to my school and work with everybody.
All right. Similar to Nick, Alex is another well-known patient of the Smart Center. She was actually the host of this podcast for the first dozen or so episodes before she went on to grad school. Alex is awesome and has been very active at community camps over the years. If you want to listen to more from Alex, go back to episode 48 on the podcast feed. All right, for our next clip, we're going to jump ahead a couple episodes to episode 51, which was released back on April 21st. And this is another one of our Ask Dr. E episodes. In this cut from the episode, a teacher asked Dr. E how they can help their student with SM better interact with their peers in the classroom. So here's what Dr. E had to say to that teacher. All right, let's move on to question number 5. Our child has made great progress with selective mutism, but still speaks only to certain people. And we want to help expand that circle. Do you have practical strategies teachers can use in the classroom to encourage more peer interaction and verbal communication? So this is really a question for teachers.
Well, it's no for parents too. I'll tell you why, because the basic concepts aren't understood yet. So definitely consider the SM in the school conference for sure, because we talk a ton about this. But comfort and connection precede communication. Comfort precedes communication. Progress doesn't tend to occur in a group. Your child needs to understand that you're not just going to start to talk to random people. It doesn't work that way. And we can't make that child feel it does. It's our job as parents, it's our job as teachers to set the world up, the silent goals, the buddy process. So how do you build comfort and do strategies away from the group, which is what you need to do. So you do it through the buddy process. You do it through the buddy process. We pair and group children, 3 to 5 children or 2 to 3 kids based on the age and the child's overall anxiety. We pair and group with them. We sit them with them, in small groups next to them in their desk area. All the teachers know. Parents are simultaneously, ideally, working on outside get-togethers. We're doing small groups in the room, like spot work, pull-in work with other, doing some kind of small group. It could be math manipulatives. It could be reading. It could be anything in the back of the room, in the spot in the room. Pull-outs, friendship groups, lunch bunches, clubs, activities away from the group. And we do all of this as a means to set the world up for success to occur. So rather than thinking it as just how do we get us verbalizing with more kids, it's how can we set this up, whether you need accommodations through a formal 504 or an IEP, depending on how your child is functioning in the school. 504s and IEPs and the differences are important. They're in public school. You might want to, I think we have an episode on that, but also like realizing that children do need accommodations and interventions to make that progress. We say this all the time at camp. Children aren't going to walk in and say, hey, do this, ask me questions this way, make sure you sit me with those two kids. Make sure when you ask me a question, you give me 5 to 10 seconds to respond. They don't do it. Now, if there is a child that's super proactive and wants to walk in and kind of give a list to their teacher, all right, great. But the majority don't. We need to educate others on how to question, when to question, where to question, and with who to question. And through the setup and through the integration that we will create for a child, for a teen, communication will occur. For example, reading directions in a small group for a verbal child. That's not having a conversation like, hey, how you doing? What are you doing this weekend? That's the hardest thing to do. The easiest thing is to focus on a task at the level that they can accomplish with teachers or parents or whomever facilitating to help them move. For example, a child is sitting next to a buddy and the child can speak, maybe 1 or 2 words. The teacher approaching and saying, are you guys going to study the environment or government and focus on another child first? That minimizes the expectation on the one child. Then turns to the child with SM. Do you want to study the environment or government? Choice question. Kind of looking at their paper so they're not staring at the child, avoiding direct eye contact.
Yeah.
If the child doesn't answer, re-ask and prompt write and read. Maybe that child can't talk to the teacher, but uses the peer as the intermediary that they are comfortable with because they built that connection and comfort. They've even had outside get-togethers, or they're in a club and they're verbal with that child, maybe not overly initiative and elaborative. So maybe the teacher says, do you want to study the environment or government? No answer. Tell Rebecca. Then we educate the teacher to repeat with that eye contact. So there's strategies, Brandon. That's what's missing. It's relying on that child to go into that scenario and start to talk when that's not fair to the child.
It seems like a lot really falls on the teachers. And
absolutely,
obviously there's special needs schools and with more accommodations per child, but there's a lot of kids with SM who are in normal schools, public schools, private schools, that it really does fall on the teacher, how good your teacher is, how invested they want to be, and how much time and energy they want to put into your child. Look,
most teachers go into teaching because they want to help a child. So we tend to find that most teachers, unless they have a real strong kind of view it as they've got to talk, you need to talk, are very receptive to understanding. Because if they've had a child in their class with selective mutism and the child hasn't made a ton of progress, they want to learn.
At this point, is there other teachers, elementary school teachers, middle school teachers that don't know SM exists? Like, has everyone dealt with an SM student at this point?
No, I think there are plenty, unfortunately. As much as that we've tried to educate, and I know the Selective Mutism Association, we've tried to educate through that organization for years. That was when I originally started it, to bring awareness, to educate. That was the point of the SMA when I started 1,010 years ago, was to bring awareness, because I knew so few people understood my own daughter. So it was about educating, but it's about training.
That was like 20, 30 years ago, not to age you or anything like that. Sorry about that. But, now I'm talking about now.
No, there are some. Yes, I'd say more know it. And yes, I'm old, but I would say, yes, I am. It's been a while, 1 million kids in 1 million years. I feel like I've been doing it if you add up the hours, but it's okay. I love it. But training is critical. With every family we work with, we want to train the schools. And many schools will fund that through purchase orders, whether it's us or another expert center that really knows how to set up appropriate accommodations interventions. These children need it, and it's based on your child's unique needs. I mean, they need an evaluation to determine their needs. It's not just get a child to talk. You missed the boat. It's about understanding that child's unique needs. And quite a few of them have whys of SM that are stopping them. So if you're treating to speak, you're missing the boat because you're missing the whys that you need to accommodate also.
Well, I really like that question. I think that's the strategies in the classroom are always topics. That's always a topic that comes up. It's always our best performing content from our end, like that we see. And I know that always comes up in a camp too. So
yeah, I mean, the biggest issue, at camp, we train for the 3 days, Brandon. The last day is school. We do it that way to give everyone the concepts and understanding before we educate on school, because that by that point they're really understanding their child and their needs, because we're going through it the entire process during the entire camp process.
It's a ton of great information. Is this the basis of the motivation behind parents that choose to homeschool their kid or choose to take their kid out and put them in a new school? Is like, here's the strategies to their teacher and the teacher's not implementing it? Like, what do you do when a teacher's not implementing it? Not to add, this might be a separate Ask Dr. E question, but
No, I think it's a good, tangent off this question. I think you have two questions there. One is the homeschool process. The other is like, what
we
do
have
you do?
content on that too.
Yeah, but I think it's important to say that I'm not against homeschooling. Sometimes you hear Dr. E's against homeschooling. I am not against homeschooling. What I am against is lack of social communication opportunity. The kids need to be exposed to other children. They need to learn what it's like to be with other children, conversation starters, even if they're listening and learning from others, not just us from the child. So they need to have that ability to interact and build those skills. You're not born with it. I mean, you have most are born with the ability to do it, right? There are plenty that, we work with have developmental delays and they skill deficits. That's different. But we need to have those opportunities. Some people homeschool because they didn't feel their school was able to meet their needs, even with a 504 or an IEP, or they were in an environment where homeschooling was very popular. But there are this select few that pull their child out of school without giving the school a chance and will homeschool because they don't want their child to feel any anxiety, which sometimes I don't necessarily agree with.
No, I could definitely see that. You also feel like there's a lot of pressure.
This is why training schools is critical. That's why I did SM in school. Prior to COVID, I was going all, you remember, I would go all around the country and speak in different cities on this, for years about selective mutism, and did SM in the school conferences because school teachers and and look, kids can live in the comfort of their home, right? You've got the percentage of kids that really do struggle in the home environment, rare, but there are. But for the most part, most kids are fine at home in the comfort of their home. So school is the most obvious setting and the most prevalent setting that you see selective mutism air its head and where those difficulties with social communication occur. Right. So of course, in the school where kids spend 8 to 10 hours a day sometimes, they need to learn the skills, and others in that setting need to know how to implement. So that's where accommodations, interventions are critical. Training is absolutely needed. End of story.
Yeah. All right. So for our last clip of 2025, we're going to jump ahead to episode 60, which was released this past fall on September 8th and features a discussion between Dr. E and psychiatrist Dr. NATALIE WEDER from the Child Mind Institute in New York City on how to help young children bounce back from social and emotional setbacks. So in this cut that we pulled out, Dr. E and Dr. WEDER explore the concept of resilience in children with SM and how understanding the biological basis of the condition helps both parents and children develop coping strategies when treating selective mutism. Check it out.
And I guess one of my biggest questions that I would say, resilience, like, let's define that for our audience.
I think of resilience, I think there are many definitions of resilience, but one of the ones I find very important in SM is this concept of overcoming obstacles, building skills to tolerate distress, to learn from adversity or difficult experiences, and to keep growing and adjusting to a changing environment and different, challenges that come our way.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that people don't even know to think about this topic. That's the interesting part. How did you get into this niche of a topic?
Well, I think it came from a different background. One of my biggest interests in child psychiatry was always child abuse. I did research on the topic. I worked with kids who had been abused, and resilience is such an important component of that, right? Because these are kids who have experienced all types of, challenges, many times coming from the people who are supposed to protect you the most in life. And as I worked more and more with kids with selective mutism, it made me really wonder of, these kids have also a different type of obstacle that they're facing, but it starts pretty early in life, right? This extreme fear of speaking, which is something we have to do all the time. And they're almost forced to build resilience at a pretty early age, and it's a constant encounter. And so in a way, resilience becomes incredibly important, particularly in this population.
Yeah, and I know a very sensitive topic to our listeners is the term abuse. So we want our listeners to know by no means are we saying that SM and abuse in the traditional sense are a connection here. We're just mentioning that that's how Dr. WEDER got into this, because it is kind of like a niche of an interest. And I love it because I think it comes in so many different forms. I think a lot of children feel very alone. I think they feel very like they're a lone ranger out there when people really do misunderstand them. So they have to almost develop resiliency. But I also think parents need skills to help with that, because I think in my opinion, so many children with that focus on speaking when they're not yet ready causes them to feel bad about themselves. And sometimes they fall. They're not able to do it. How do you work with parents in that capacity to really add in that support network and meeting them kind of where they're at?
Something that I find very helpful is psychoeducation. I really try to go into the biology of selective mutism or anxiety in general, because I feel like if parents can understand where this is coming from and why it is so important to give the child the appropriate skills and why it is important to sometimes do exposures, even though we know that the child might get anxious in the beginning, then it makes sense. Then it almost like it clicks, right? Okay, well, like if let's say my amygdala is overreactive and the alarm system is going off when it really shouldn't, and I want to retrain this alarm system, then I'm going to do it little by little, but you have to face the fear, otherwise you don't make progress, right? And so if they understand the framework behind that, if it makes sense to them, it's much easier for them to then like put these skills into practice and see progress from them.
So basically what you're saying is, which is the way I see it as well, is we train parents to kind of meet the kids where they're at. And by doing so, we're not unrealistic with expectations, but we're also not enabling them either. We're meeting them where they're at to help them grow and have that resilience. And because, I don't love the term SM because it's so much about speaking, but so much of this, as you're saying, is about understanding that unique individual. Like, what is it about them? What is it about them that's they're not speaking? And how do we meet them where they are? So I think, the setbacks of when you're changing environments and changing people and, people change, environments change is what I mean to say, is that their communication will change. And so if they're not able to speak in one environment and they're not able to even engage, but yet they are in another, it makes them feel like a failure. And failures are more like, well, what are we going to learn from this? Why is that happening? So how do you nurture that with the families you work with?
Well, something that I tend to do with a lot of families is share my own experience. I had SM symptoms when I was a child.
I didn't know that. Wow.
I do. That's part, and I have a daughter who also had the same symptoms. And
Look at us with the same exact background. I didn't have SM, but my daughter. So that's an interesting, I didn't realize that about you. Thank you for sharing.
Of course, no. But I think that for me, it's very easy to know what it felt like when somebody would speak to me, and I would just feel my heart racing and like literally like almost sweating, and nobody understood why. But then if I was talking to my girlfriends, I was the most talkative person. And so sometimes people feel like you're faking it, right? Or like it's like a choice, and you don't understand why it is that when the teacher tells you what's your name, you can't say a word, but with your friends, you're like all over the place, right? And so I think that understanding that many times the child doesn't really know why, especially when they're so little. Many times it starts when you're very little. You just feel it's like the startle response is profound and nothing comes out, right? I always tell my patients it's a little bit like when you're going down the roller coaster. There are some people who immediately start screaming, right? I cannot get a sound out of my mouth, no matter how much. It's like I just freeze, right? And I don't choose it. It's not something conscious. It just kind of happens to me, right? And so going over that, explaining that, and helping parents understand how little of a choice it is for the child and how little sometimes even understanding they have, but how we can work with them on overcoming that, I feel makes the kids feel like they're failing less, creates less judgment, but also creates like almost like a path that they can start following to get over the symptoms.
No, that makes complete sense. And I think, when children are nonverbal in a setting and they're not able to speak, let's talk about, the resiliency there. I think a lot of kids are trying to cope with the environment and they're going with it like they're not able to. So their resilience is just trying to be there instead of, they're basically shut down in that point. But I think it's knowing why they're shut down. And I think it's about learning that. Like, is it a loud, large, lots of people environment? Is it the high expectation from the person in the environment? Is it that they have speech and language issues? Process it. What is the reason? And I think that psychoeducation, which you were talking about, is really important because then we can support the children. Then we can help them understand why. And when we're doing the goals, when we're doing the strategies, we're able to kind of say why we're doing them. I always find, I'm assuming you do too, that the more the kids understand, the more almost the resilient they become because they don't feel like a failure.
100%. And also, they feel less alone. Oh, there's such a thing as selective mutism. I'm not the only one. There's nothing strange about me. I'm not choosing to not speak. It's not, it's not fully under my control. All of that makes them feel understood, heard, but also hopeful.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's taking challenges and then like resetting it. So one of my questions is, let's talk about from the SM standpoint, like the core aspects of emotional resilience. I wrote to be able to tolerate the uncertainty of life. I mean, it's one thing to have your parents around to guide you, a 3, 4, 5-year-old, but as children age, it's difficult. And I think the tolerance and the uncertainty and the discomfort and being okay in your own skin, so to speak. So I thought it would be interesting to talk about, like, as settings change and the anxiety is there, how do you talk to the kids about that change and how they feel to become more resilient?
Exactly. I think that if we think about again, like resilience as facing an obstacle and like, winning, it's like with selective mutism, you have to like, the obstacle is your own biology. It's like for whichever reason your brain decided to feel to a 10 to make you feel like there's a lion in front of you when it's just a person speaking. Like it's much easier to calm down if you're a bit upset than if you're profoundly upset, or a bit anxious than you're profoundly anxious. So these kids have to regulate very, very strong emotions that most people, if you ask them the other night, they don't even feel anxious, right? Like, and now you're feeling like you're gonna die, right? And so if they understand that, and if we start little by little in terms of like the treatment process, and we make them feel safe, and they see a little success, then we're creating hope, right? Like I don't know that I'll be able to talk to my teacher, but I was able to answer her question if I wanted red or pink, and nothing bad happened. And as I speak, and this vague like fear that I have doesn't come true, and I do it over and over, then I'm proud of myself, because I always think that you can tell a child that they're amazing and that they're best, and like you can whatever, unless I'm able to talk to you, I will never believe that. I have to feel it in my own skin. That's why it's so important to work in this setting where the child is slowly making progress. Because otherwise it's like, yeah, my mom thinks I'm best, but I don't really know that, right? And so as they do that, the resilience starts to develop, right? Like it's like they're investing in that, and it grows and grows and grows as they overcome more challenges.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, we all have different ways we come about it. I have found in my practice that using the bridge and the different stages has been very helpful for a lot of kids because they don't feel like failures, and that which causes them to kind of like feel shame a lot. And I think dealing with that shame and why can somebody do this so easily and I can't, and people placing expectations when they're not ready to do something can be hard. But I have found the bridge is helpful. So for me, the bridge gives them resiliency. So I may not be able to initiate, I can respond and maybe I use a parent as an intermediary, or I'm working on nonverbal initiation in this setting. Like it gives them a sense of control. So would you say that transferring control and giving these kids control helps with their resiliency? I do.
100%, 100%. Right? Like I think you need, as you said, you need to meet the child where they're at, and then slowly build from that. And sometimes it's just like looking at you. Sometimes it's not hiding under the table. That's
Right.
a success, right? Like, or being able to play a game in front of you, even if they don't say a word. The goal is to reduce suffering and free them from anxiety. It doesn't just have to be like a word. It can present itself in many ways, right?
Yeah, no. And I think a big part is parent education. You said that in the beginning, but our kids tend to be very sensitive. They're very aware. They have emotional dysregulation, many of them, but they're highly sensitive, many of them. So they feel what the parents feel and what they're thinking. So they feel that it's projected onto them. So I think a big part of our work, I mean, I know it's a big part of our work, is really helping parents. I don't want to say fake it till you make it, but to really deal with their own frustrations and understanding of this, because if they're projecting frustration onto their children or disappointment, that doesn't help with resiliency.
I think that's 100% right. And for me, the fake it till you make it, there's an aspect of exposures where you are like, I'm going to say something and I do not know what's going to happen, but I'm going to pretend that I can do it and let's see how it goes, right? I also think that if your child is anxious and you seem anxious, what you're conveying is, I don't believe you can't do it. I believe this is scary. And so we both should be scared and therefore you should continue to be scared. But if I'm calm and I'm saying, I understand how you feel and I believe you can do it, then I'm transferring a lot of power and self-esteem onto you, right?
Yeah, no, it goes along with, I tell families, adults, to avoid can you language. Can you do that? And I tell them to avoid you need to and you should language, because you need to and you should. And if they can't, create shame and frustration, depression, all that. But can you language implies doubt. And neither of
100%.
and neither of those two extremes create resiliency. It creates disarray. It creates, I use the word shame a lot because I think that's almost the opposite of resiliency a lot of times. Like they just feel so bad about themselves and the way they present. So that fake it till you make it. And you know, when you're anxious, you get that flat affect. I see a lot of parents that get that almost like intense flat affect, and we have to help them reframe it. And I'm sure it's similar too with you guys at Child Mind. Like if we can give these parents hope, it changes who they are and how,
100%.
right? So giving them the hope, educating them, helping them understand why things are happening, it calms them down, which then transfers to their kids.
To add to that, I sometimes think that people believe like, my child has selective mutism because my child is insecure or my child doesn't have a strong self-esteem. My experience with most kids is that the symptoms start before they even have a sense of self, a narrative of who they are. They go to pre-K, somebody asks them their name, nothing comes out, right? And over time, as you get older and have this experience, you start you create your own narrative, right? Like, oh, I must do this because I'm not smart, or I must do this because something happened to me, or I must, like, it's more like you're trying to explain a symptom than the symptom not having been there before, right? Like, so for me, it's very important, the aspect of like, no, your child was wired to feel more and they have a stronger response. It's not that they're insecure or not. Over time, this can make them feel shame. This can make them feel that they cannot connect. But it's not that there was something wrong with them to begin with, and that's why they're having the symptom, right? Many times people believe, oh, you have anxiety or you have selective mutism because you're insecure, because there's something wrong with you, because like you don't have strong self-esteem. And I think it's the opposite. It's like you are wired to have very strong feelings of anxiety when a certain trigger happens, and it's typically before you even have enough words to explain it to yourself or to understand who you are, like this concept of like more metacognition, more abstract thinking, like this is who I am, right? And so as this happens and it happens repeatedly and you do experience shame, or then you start developing like ideas to understand it. Oh, maybe I'm doing this because of that. Or you hear people say, oh, he's this, he's the other, right? Like, and so then it becomes an insecurity, but it starts more like a symptom that then has all of these kind of connotations to it, right? And so I tell parents, it's not like they were born insecure. This is a hard symptom to have, and over time it became a source of shame, but there was nothing like inherently insecure about them.
You know, the kids see it as like this big, like mountain out of a molehill. Talk, you got to talk. And when they can't, they don't feel great. One of the things we work with parents about is helping mention their positives, like emphasize positives and minimize their negatives. So yeah, using your words right now in a classroom with a class full of kids and teachers is hard, but look at all that you are doing. Look how strong you are and amazing you are at playing the piano and really taking a skill. So to help with resiliency, we try to create what we call big shot confidence building. So creating areas that they're confident and using that in the treatment. So they may help a peer. They may, be very, very skilled in an area, and we take those areas and we figure them out and we build on that to help their confidence, because I always say comfort, connection, confidence fuels communication. So when one of those pillars is missing, they're not comfortable, they don't have a connection to somebody, and they're not confident, they probably aren't going to speak.
That makes sense. Yes.
So we have to build all of those pillars to get that fuel for communication. So that's a big thing for parents to help kids become resilient because they'll feel proud of themselves. Thank you for listening to Unspoken Words, a Selective Mutism podcast hosted by me, Dr. E, and the Smart Center. This episode and all episodes of Unspoken Words is produced by New Edition Productions. Don't forget to submit any questions you have from today's episode using our Ask Dr. E form on our website. Just head to selectivemutismcenter.org/ask-DRE. I'd love to answer your question in a future episode or blog post. Remember, for the best of this episode and every episode of Unspoken Words, please follow the podcast on Instagram and YouTube. We are at Unspoken Words _podcast on Instagram and Unspoken Words by DRE on YouTube. Or join our newsletter for additional SM content. We release new episodes every other Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll see you next time.